Hello and welcome to Mobilizing the Future of Fleets. It's a podcast dedicated to helping fleet managers navigate the road ahead. I'm Barney Goffer, and today we are diving into the principles of environmental, social and governance, commonly referred to as ESG. Now, in this episode, I'm joined by two experts from the US and Australia who have kindly agreed to join us to help explore what ESG entails, its significance in today's business environment, and how transport companies can effectively integrate ESG principles into their operation. I'm delighted to welcome back Heather Bone, ESG Director at Team Global Express, based in Newcastle, Australia. Heather last joined us to share her trailblazing experience deploying electric trucks.
Lovely to be here, Barney. Really nice to see you again.
Also, Katie Rowen joins us from North Carolina. Katie is a Senior Vice President and Sustainability Leader at the Vontier Corporation, which provides multi-energy solutions for the mobility industry. In 2024, Vontier was recognized by Time as one of the world's most sustainable companies.
Yeah, Barney, thanks so much for having me. Delighted and excited for the conversation. And Heather, really looking forward to engaging with you.
Look, we're here today really to talk about ESG, environmental, social and governance reporting. You guys are both experts in this field. I am not, so I'll make that confession right now. So I'm going to be probably asking some what might be quite dumb questions, but let's start with an easy one to begin with. And that is really straightforward. What is ESG and why has it become such a critical focus for businesses today? And Katie, as our new guest, I'll come to you first with that one, please.
Okay, super. Well, really, it's, to boil it down, it's not complicated. It's really just a set of non-financial metrics across, as you said, Barney, sort of these categories of topics under the E, S, and G umbrella, environmental, social, and governance. And really, it's a way to track at a deeper level sort of the risks and opportunities that companies are facing. And many investors, in fact, all of our top investors, care deeply about this. They think that being able to track and have access to that data, again, not just about core financial matters affecting the company, but kind of the long-term viability and sustainable viability of companies, that's important to stakeholders well beyond investors. So even if you're not a public company, employees, prospective employees, the communities in which you live and work, those topics and the data around those topics is really important to all of those stakeholders.
Great, thank you, Katie. And Heather, maybe you'd like to answer that question, but perhaps in the context of our customers, you being one of them, transport operators. So why has ESG become such a critical focus for you guys?
Yeah, I agree with Katie. It's a very broad church, perhaps. All of those United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and I tend to explain it as it gives us some boundaries around how we do business. So it's not so much about what we're doing, it's about how we're doing business in the communities, how we interact with our staff, with our subcontractors, because what's interesting in transport, certainly in Australia, but I think it's a fairly widely held notion, is that there are a lot of contractors and subcontractors doing our work. So while we might have, say, 8,000 staff, we've got at least another 8,000 subcontractors. And it gives us a framework to put some boundaries around how we work with them as well.
You've mentioned there you sort of focused on Australia, which is absolutely great. I think in the EU, we're very, very sort of heavily regulated, particularly from an ESG perspective. Is that true about the US, Katie? And then Heather, if you can answer the same question for Australia as well, that'd be great.
Yeah, the landscape around sort of the regulations and the disclosures has changed quite a bit, but it's very dynamic and it keeps changing. And so where most companies were following voluntary frameworks in the past, now sort of fast forward to today, and there's more and more mandatory frameworks. So CSRD is one that's top of mind.
Sorry to cut across. What CSRD was that? Did I hear that correctly?
Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. So a new law in Europe. You've got sort of the SEC climate rules in the US that are fresh and new. And so I think the important thing to remember is not so much going deep sort of on one specific kind of regulatory scheme, but just understanding that for companies that operate across the globe, that landscape continues to grow. There's more and more regulations covering more topics under the ESG umbrella. And the number of mandatory disclosure requirements, those continue to grow and increase.
And for Australia, we actually lag the rest of the world. I don't think there's a polite way to put this, unfortunately. I look at the EU and I look at the US and I get really jealous about the sort of mandatory requirements that you have, because we are only just in the process in putting some of them in place now. So what is known as the ISSB, which is the International Sustainability Standards Board, we are going to have that or the Australian iteration of that as of the 1st of January next year. So we are quite slow. We're only getting Euro 6 engines this year when, the end of 2024, when the EU has had Euro 6 from, I think, about 2012, 2013. So it's actually led, our lagging has actually led to some quite distorted outcomes in the world of ESG as well. And I'll give you the example that we know that a lot of the feedstocks that we have for making energy and for fuel in Australia regularly go to the EU or to the US, where there are mandated requirements and there's double counting on carbon schemes, that sort of thing. So the fact that we are so far behind means we're going to have to grapple in the future with bringing some of those feedstocks back to Australia to use them locally.
Great. I mean, Heather, if you had a magic wand, what would you want government to do then in terms of adding to the regulatory framework that you call out as being lagging?
Absolutely, some sort of price on carbon, because in transport, what tends to happen is, the industry has very, very low margins, 2 or 3%, tiny margins. And any change from an operator such as us, we have to pass that cost through to the consumer because it's got to go somewhere. But inevitably what happens is that, larger operators, when they try to do that, increase in costs, of course it means that the smaller operators come up and are able to gobble up. From a procurement perspective, they're the ones winning the bids and tenders because they're not factoring something new into their pricing model. So, I think some sort of price on carbon, absolutely. Our materiality assessment always comes up with waste and recycling. That it'd be really good if there was some sort of mechanism for us to move the dial on that. Transport is in an interesting position when it comes to waste and recycling, in that we're just there as the transport operator, right? We're not there. We're not the one making the waste, and we're not the one disposing of the waste. We're just that component in the middle, getting it from point A to point B. So I think that would be a really good one. And the third for me is all around diversity. How do we encourage different cultures, more women, younger operators to get into an industry that is becoming older, in the sense that we have quite a collection of older people in the industry, and a lot of them are men. So we've got some really big changes to make around diversity and inclusion.
Yeah, great.
Barney, can I have a chance with the magic wand?
Don't worry, I was not going to forget about asking you that question. I was going to come back to you, so please fire away.
I had total envy of the magic wand that Heather had, because there's a lot of room for improvement across the board. Look, I would just call out a couple of other things. I think harmonization of frameworks over time. There's so many different frameworks, and more of them are coming up, and companies have limited resources and limited teams to be able to sort of pull different data cuts. Companies are all for transparency, or they should be. But at some point, with so many different disclosure regimes, both kind of voluntary and mandatory, different ways to slice and dice data, different expectations if you operate globally, you can end up spending a lot of time sort of pulling similar data that's not very value add, right? Disclosures are important, transparency is important, but it's not impact. And so I think over time, sort of more harmonization of disclosures will be very appreciated. And think about financial reporting data, right? We've had decades for that to evolve in terms of expectations and standards. And we've been trying to do that with ESG data just for sort of a few years. And so I think harmonization will be very important. And I think also just opening up the aperture more around kind of a multi-energy future. Sometimes in certain regions, a lot of the regulatory focus with good intent can get sort of myopically focused on one solution. So let's say electrification. But it might not be the solve across every region in the world. It might not be the solve for different modes of transportation that have different challenges. And so making sure that regulators, if I had a magic wand, opened up the aperture for multi-energy, multi-fuel technologies to all be a part of the solution for different modes of transportation.
Yeah, fantastic. And you know what? We've touched on this in previous podcasts that we've done. You know, we spoke about Africa, for example, and how on earth do we electrify everything over there? You know, there's going to be a need for ICEs and transferring a lot of the assets that they use over there to EVs, just not realistic given the current sort of infrastructure requirements and everything. So to what extent do you both think government regulations drive your ESG strategy, and are these regulations enough really to bring real change in the transport sector?
So in Australia, I think that our government tends to be behind the eight ball when it comes to ESG legislation and regulation. I'll give you a couple of examples. They've only recently put in place the Modern Slavery Act, and so companies have actually been reporting on that for quite some time. They're starting to put things like Euro 6, Tier 4 final into our engine makeup, and that's because the industry is driving it, and we want to see those changes. We now have electric vehicles that we've had to work with the state governments to drive change around steer axle limits and overwidth bodies. So in actual fact, I would say the ESG side is to a certain extent, industry is actually pulling government along for the ride and for the journey. Now that I think and I hope also means that by the time they're putting legislation in place or changing those regulations, that legislation is going to work for the broadest number of people in the industry. It's not going to be legislation that we have to update in 5 years because something went wrong. I think having taken them along on this journey and pushing them along that path, it means that hopefully we're going to get it right from the start.
Yeah, great. That's interesting because obviously, Heather, you're one of the largest transport fleets, you know, globally, certainly in Australia. But these regulations, what do they actually mean to maybe the significantly smaller fleets and the medium to small enterprises out there? Does it land with them? Does it resonate with them? Or what needs to maybe change from a regulation perspective for them to come on board with this?
Larger entities like us, if we're driving that change, it actually makes it a little bit easier for smaller operators because they have a quieter voice in the industry, which means that entities like us have to step up and have that relationship with government to make that change. But you also can't underestimate, in Australia at least, that the subcontractor arrangement in Australia is so broad. So there might be a person with one truck or two trucks. They are probably part of an entity such as us. It's fairly rare for them to be going out alone and just being an individual truck trying to, work outside of what is a very rigorous structure around transport and logistics. So the industry here actually works really quite closely together in a good way. And, for example, my electric trucks, as part of our journey as the depot Bungarabie, I have committed to government through our grant process that I will be making sure that I take people along for that knowledge sharing journey. If that's a single operator or 100 trucks, whatever that looks like, means that I'm taking them along on that journey as well. So it's a little bit, maybe the structure is a little bit different in Australia.
Yeah, it feels like there's a more of a pull from enterprise fleets in this particular example than necessarily than the government. But you're going to get there by the sounds of it, right?
Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed.
Yeah. And Katie, if you want to, I don't know if you want me to ask the question again.
No, you don't need to ask it again. I mean,
Yeah.
look, stakeholder capitalism has been around for decades without a big kind of governmental, regulatory, mandatory kind of frameworks and things like that, right? Because it's about sort of that value generation. It's about other stakeholders beyond the government sort of pushing things along. And even in the absence of any sort of regulation, our investors care a lot about this. Again, our employees, prospective employees, our whole purpose as an organization is mobilizing the future to create a better world, right? So for us, when we think about the long-term vitality of our organization, it's ESG is always going to be alive and well, regardless of sort of the regulators coming behind.
Great answer. Yeah, okay, fully agree. Just to move the conversation on a little bit, I think we touched on this when we started the conversation, actually. We're talking about sort of, the importance of the benefits of ESGs. And Katie, you were talking about investor relations and the requirement for it. How can robust ESG practices benefit transport companies in particular in terms of operational efficiency, reputation, and finance performance? Reputation. Yeah, I'll leave it there. Actually, there's quite a lot there.
Yeah, I mean, ESG should be all about value generation, right? So again, disclosures are important, but they're not impact. Data is really important, but it needs to be actionable data. And how are you driving value for all your stakeholders? And so that might be operational efficiencies, reducing costs, reducing fuel usage. If you have factories, those factories running more efficiently. It may be certainly around kind of reputational and brand equity improvements in terms of how you're perceived by external stakeholders, prospective employees, your customers and the like. Certainly our customers care a lot about this and care a lot about the good that we're doing, for all of our stakeholders. And certainly from a financial performance standpoint, beyond just reducing costs, if you get everybody in your organization looking through a lens of ESG and looking through all those topics and thinking about value generation, you start to innovate as well and can drive top line growth. So it's really, it's about improvements. It's about driving value across a number of dimensions.
Great. And Heather, I'm so keen to hear what you've got to say about this as well, because obviously living and breathing it by running a transport company, how does that relate to you, that question?
Yeah, data is king, really, isn't it? We're finding more and more that if data can point us in a different direction, a more creative direction, a more innovative direction, then that's I'm all for that. And I think ESG and innovation are two sides to a coin, really. Maybe with a bit of risk thrown in. What I'm finding for transport and logistics is there's a dearth of data. What data there is not necessarily all that good. And so we've got a long way to go to build a platform where we have the information to say, okay, we should be doing this. And I'll give you an example that we will be shortly announcing our emissions, if I dare focus on emissions again, our emissions for this year. And interestingly, they're not that different from last year. And what that tells me is that over the last year, we've been trying to drive efficiency, really hard, having higher productivity vehicles, carrying more for less, we call it. But in actual fact, if you just come at it from an emissions perspective, it says, you know what, you're actually not being all that efficient. So I think we need to be able to take that data and run with it so that we are actually doing something in an innovative way or a different way.
I don't know whether this question's relevant now based on the sort of really positive lens and approach that ESG gives a business, because clearly it is about improving operational efficiency and your overall outlook to businesses so that you're more appealing to work with, to trade with and everything. But do you sometimes see or is there sometimes a requirement to balance the need for profitability with the push for more sustainable operations within your company, do those two things sometimes butt heads here?
I think they certainly there can be trade-offs at a number of companies. I think for us, we found, and we've existed as a public company really for only 4 years. We spun out from another company, and I think we found that there's so much low-hanging fruit even today, 4 years into this journey, to generate a ton of value, that we're not in a ugly trade-off stage. We're able to sort of find those win-win-win solutions. With rigorous goal setting in the out years, you could see having sort of some tension there. But, ultimately, and I said it before, I sound like a broken record, but it's really about, there's so many things that you can focus on under the ESG umbrella. If you try to do everything well, you're not going to do anything well. So what is materially important to you, your stakeholders, your investors, and how do you focus on generating value there through your program? And if you use that as your touchstone, you're not going to be engaged in a ton of kind of conflict trade-off discussions.
Yeah, great. Okay, awesome. So I'm going to move on to implementation and approach. So, and Heather, I'll come to you first on this one, if that's okay. So, what are the initial steps that you, as a leader in this space, have taken TGE on? And what advice would you give to people that are kind of embarking on their ESG reporting journey? Where should they start?
The very best thing that you can do when you're starting down an ESG journey is start with a materiality assessment. It really, you need to figure out for your business, what are the topics out of the UN SDGs that you really have to focus on. So take the time to talk to your stakeholders, your shareholders, your employees, the communities in which you're operating, and understand exactly the materiality of those SDGs. And the reason I say that is, you can't possibly focus on all of them. And it is going to be rare that a business even needs to think about operating, in such a way that you have to focus on all of those things. You can't be all to everyone. So I always say start with materiality assessment and decide what are going to be the things that you have to focus on, and what are going to be the things that you need to focus on or want to focus on as well. Because as an example, diversity and inclusion, is it something that you need to focus on, or is that an opportunity that you want to focus on?
Yeah, great. Katie, anything you want to add to Heather's talk track on that?
I couldn't agree more. She's absolutely right. Your materiality assessment is absolutely critical. And then secondarily after that, it's data. It's not the sexiest topic in the world, but it's so important to really have high fidelity data and be thoughtful about how you're collecting it, who's collecting it, what your standards are. Is it auditable? Can you automate it? Because without your data, you've sort of got nothing. So materiality assessments and data.
Yeah, great. You might have answered this next question, to be fair, both of you there, but I'll ask it anyway. So it's like, I wanted to hear some sort of best practices for integrating ESG principles. Maybe Katie, if you answer this from a Vontier point of view, and then Heather from a customer's perspective. But what are the best practices when you're integrating ESG principles into your day-to-day operations?
I think for us, so we talk a lot about our business system, the Vontier business system, and we say it drives everything that we do. It's all about continuous improvement, and it's inextricably bound with ESG and sustainability. And so when you think about, for us, how to implement ESG efforts, sustainability efforts, it's really very similar to how we think about the business system. It's about setting up standard work. It's about automating things. It's continually getting better, about data fidelity. Having stand-up meetings every day. It's about paying attention to the right topics as a team and sort of tracking that in the right ways. So there's a lot of synergies there for us, and it's a common language that we all speak as employees across the globe in terms of the Vontier business system, and so we use that as a way to implement our ESG program as well.
Great, thank you. And Heather?
I think I would add just one element, and that is sometimes you need to take a step back and have someone really independent look through their lens of what's going on in the business, because you're not necessarily going to get the same answers when you're immersed in the business to someone coming in, in that first week or two where they're coming in with their eyes wide open, or if you have the opportunity to, and this is expensive, of course, but if you have the opportunity to have an independent consultant as part of that materiality assessment, you might find the answers are a little bit different when it's someone independent coming in, and your employees, your customers might take the opportunity to say something that they're not necessarily going to say to you, face to face, for whatever reason that might be. So if you can take a little bit of independence to look through that lens, as Katie was talking about, then you might find the story is a little bit different to what you expect.
I was going to move on to actually challenges. That seemed like what Heather you were talking about there it seemed like a nice segue to go into, challenges and pitfalls that you have or you have experienced. So what are they, anything that you've experienced, Heather, or any companies that they will face when implementing ESG frameworks? And is there anything unique in particular to the transport space that you've experienced, Heather?
Yeah, so when we focus on the S and the G, they're reasonably straightforward, right? The S and G for transport are, we know where we need to head. It's the E that is really challenging, and we've just recently finalised, or at least we have the final truck out of 60 trucks, 60 electric trucks. And I use that example because what we've really discovered more and more is in trying to lower our carbon, we found that electric vehicles absolutely are going to be one part of a very big journey. They're not going to be the be-all and end-all for everyone. And even in that EV space, what we found is it's actually not so much about the truck, it's about the total energy management system. And it means that we're having to introduce concepts to our operators, our drivers, the site-based personnel. It's a really different conversation when you're trying to explain, no, I want you to use that charger over there because it's a slow charger and you don't need to be on this fast charger. I know you want to use the fast charger because it goes fast and isn't that really cool? But the cost of energy through that fast charger is immense. So I think that, when you put your data hat on and your decarbonisation hat, you realise it's a total energy transformation and not just about a particular truck. And that includes your software, your hardware, your high voltage lines in and out of the business. Like, it's really complicated. And so making it in bite-sized pieces for people to really relate to, I think is really important. We found, the team on site really need that bite-sized understanding of what's going on.
Yeah, great. I'm glad you touched on EV and also alternative energy there as well. I know that's something that's close to our heart as an organisation. We definitely see multi-fuel as the way forward for everything to be decarbonised, right? But Katie, do you want to come in there and maybe talk about this maybe from a more holistic point of view, from your experience, your vast experience of doing this?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of challenges. Look, I think we've touched on some of them. It's making sure that you're grounded in what's important to your stakeholders and not trying to boil the ocean, because you're going to have no impact and you're not going to generate value if you do that. Kind of staying true to your values as an organization is important. Do you have the right team and are they educated? There's people talk about the ESG skills gap, and so how do you increase the skills across your organization? So that you have the right people in place to help you implement the program and drive value across the org. Are you storytelling? You can collect a lot of data, you can make a lot of disclosures, you can even have a lot of impact, but if you're not telling that story to the folks who care about it, you're missing a lot of the value generation. And so do your customers understand what you're doing? Do your employees, do prospective employees understand what you're doing so that you can drive engagement and retention, for example? Those things are really important and shouldn't be forgotten.
Yeah, sure. We've mentioned the word greenwashing. I'll just ask you about it then. How do you address that challenge then, within the transport sector in particular, and what can companies do to, ensure genuine sustainability for argument's sake? I'll
start, and then Heather, I know the same word is on our minds, which is we're going to go back to data again. right? So having sort of that high fidelity data, being grounded in data, is going to be the most important thing that anybody can do to avoid sort of getting over their ski tips and greenwashing. What you're disclosing, what you're saying to any stakeholders, including customers, is it grounded in fact? Is it grounded in data? Yes or no? And how do you know, and how can you show it? And so that sort of trail, that data trail, that auditability is really, really important.
And I think I would add as well, when transport logistics as an intermodal, picture, so rail, road, sea, air, we have to be squeaky clean, and so getting the right story, making sure it's not greenwashing, and having that right story is so highly dependent on, you need to have the evidence to say that this is correct. It's critical, absolutely critical.
Yeah, hey, look, the message is clear here. Data kind of like is the foundation for effective reporting here, ultimately. Again, that's music to my ears because, we have products that provide a lot of that information as well.
Arnie, can I just like pull the thread on something that you're talking about? Because I think the companies like Teletrac Navman, that they can provide solutions here for fleets to help them in this multi-energy environment, and with the data challenges that Heather and I are talking about, you're solving for a really high value problem. And so Heather touched on this before. Imagine, put yourself and I know you do all the time, put yourself, empathetically in the shoes of a fleet operator and owner, and how overwhelming it is to figure out, okay, should I go the electrification route? If I do, how do I spread out that CapEx spend? Where should the chargers be? How do I do the routing? How do I do the energy management, as Heather's alluding to earlier? If I have a mixed fleet, how am I thinking about collecting that data? Does compressed natural gas make sense instead for my fleet? And what does that journey look like? And it's just, there's so many variables. It is wildly overwhelming. And so the companies that can come in and help solve for that have something that's really going to have high impact and help really solve a lot of problems, not just for customers, but big global and societal problems as well.
Yeah, great. And look, I'm shameless plug here, but we do help simplify that really, really, really complex process through the data that we have. We can really help customers quickly identify how they can transition, which vehicles they should, what type of infrastructure might be required, everything you've touched on there. We can help get people there quicker and accurately without, damaging business continuity and, potentially wasting a lot of money at the same time as well. So these solutions exist, they're out there. And they're ready to be used for sure. Great, thanks for that, Katie. And practical advice and future outlook. So we kind of touched on this earlier as well, actually. But what trends do you both foresee in the future of ESG reporting, generally, and then absolutely within the transport sector as well? So, Katie, do you want to go first with that one?
I do think there's going to be more harmonization. So I think we will see that from a reporting standpoint in the out years, and more kind of common expectations and around methodologies that are acceptable and the like under all these topics. And so I think that'll be very welcome for industry. I think we have seen in some parts of the world sort of some of these topics being politicized. Under the ESG umbrella. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is one such topic. Sustainability is another. Electrification within the sustainability topic. And I don't see that abating. And I think that's an additional challenge for companies to navigate across the globe. And again, using value generation as your touchstone is going to be really important for those companies to sort of stay true to what's important and material to their stakeholders and to their investors. And I think we'll see as well more of we talk a lot and we all are nodding our heads and agree with this kind of multi-energy trilemma, balancing affordability, sustainability and security relative to data. We talk about that a lot. We believe that a lot. But I think you'll see a growing kind of understanding and appreciation for that as the challenges of decarbonizing transportation become more and more apparent across the globe.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, when we get to the hard to decarbonize space, it's definitely where that EV maybe will still play a part, significant part in all of this. But there's totally the alternatives that are out there that are going to have to solve long haul, for example. Heather, your world. I'm sure you've got a view on that if you want to share it with us.
There won't be one magic silver bullet for entities like us, and I think Australia is it's a massive country. Yes, we're going to have electric trucks in a certain application that makes absolute sense around metro areas where they if they need to top up the energy, they can. Yes, we're going to see hydrogen at a point in time, probably not anytime soon. I'd say it's at least another 5 or 10 years away. But in the meantime, we really have to knuckle down and get renewable diesel. We have to have a renewable source of liquid fuels. So the depot of the future, whether that's company-owned vehicles or subcontractors, there's going to be quite a multitude of things going on at that site. There'll be EVs, there'll be renewable diesel, there'll be biodiesel. Yeah, there might be some sort of gas, although Australia we're very good at exporting all of our gas rather than using it locally. We're going to have a depot that has lots of different energy solutions.
And there you have it, another episode wrapped with a dive into ESG principles. Heather and Katie, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your knowledge and experiences.
Thank you so much for having me, Barney. Katie, an absolute pleasure to be having this conversation with you as well. So, terrific podcast.
Likewise, Heather, I enjoyed it so much. And Barney, thanks for the fantastic questions.
It's been great to have you both with us. So today we've heard how ESG truly is a broad church with a wide range of principles and practices that can vary from one organisation to another. We've also discussed the need for progress in this space. Our ESG wizards even waved their magic wands. And of course, we've highlighted the critical role that data plays in planning and managing ESG initiatives effectively. My key takeaway is that while ESG may seem complex and challenging, it's also full of opportunities for growth and improvement. Thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with your colleagues and friends who might benefit from these insights. We look forward to having you join us on our next episode, where we'll continue to explore the topics that matter to you and your business.